In the anatomy of silence, there are gradations of fear. There is the quiet of a sleeping city and the hush of a winter forest. But then there is another kind of silence, a manufactured void, a living entity born of terror. It is a silence that breathes in shallow, dusty gasps behind a false wall. It is the silence of a family erased, of heartbeats counted like contraband currency, where the creak of a floorboard carries the weight of a death sentence. For 27 months, this silence was the only world the Wolski family knew. It was their fortress and their prison, a fragile shield against a horror that was devouring a continent. How does a family simply cease to exist? At what point do names on a ledger become whispers in a cramped, dark space? What bargains are struck with God, with conscience, with a trusted neighbor when the machinery of the state declares your very existence a crime? Outside, a world was burning, consumed by an ideological plague that had rationalized mass murder into a bureaucratic process. Inside, a father, a mother, and two small children learned the brutal physics of survival. That life could be reduced to the space between floorboards, and that hope was a poison as much as it was a balm. This is not just their story. It is an autopsy of the system that drove them underground, and a testament to the terrifying complicity of a world that looked away. The final accounting is a chilling arithmetic. Of the more than 3 million Polish Jews alive in 1939, 90% would be murdered. They would be shot in pits, starved in ghettos, and gassed in camps built with industrial precision. The Wolski family was a statistical anomaly, 4 souls who slipped through the cracks of a meticulously designed engine of annihilation. Their survival was a miracle, but it was a miracle forged in the absolute darkness of a neighbor's cellar. A darkness that would stain their every waking moment for the rest of their lives. Their story is a whisper against the roaring silence of the 6 million who were lost. The nightmare did not arrive overnight. It seeped into Warsaw like a slow, cold fog. Before 1939, the Wolskis were simply a family. Jakub was a respected tailor, his hands skilled and his reputation solid. His wife, Lena, managed their small apartment with a quiet efficiency, her world defined by the scent of baking bread and the laughter of their children, 7-year-old Samuel and 5-year-old Hannah. They were Poles and they were Jews, identities that coexisted with the easy rhythm of daily life. They were ordinary, and in their ordinariness lay the profound tragedy of what was to come. The first formative trauma was not a blow, but the sound of German bombers in September, the prelude to an occupation that would methodically dismantle their world. The chosen location for the slow-motion murder of Warsaw's Jewry was the ghetto. In October of 1940, the decree was issued. A section of the city already impoverished and overcrowded was designated as the Jewish residential district. The Wolskis, along with nearly 400,000 others, were forced from their homes, allowed to take only what they could carry. The ghetto was not merely a place of containment, it was a weapon. Walls went up 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire. It was an island of starvation and disease in the middle of a European capital, designed with the cold logic of an engineer planning a dam. It was a holding pen, a laboratory for suffering and a waiting room for death. The first signs of the system's true intent were small, insidious degradations. The mandatory white armband with a blue star of David, a public marker of otherness. The curfews that emptied the streets. The casual violence of German patrols and the Polish blue police who guarded the gates. Samuel saw his first corpse on a sidewalk, a man dead from hunger covered in newspapers. He did not understand. Lena pulled him close, shielding his eyes, but she could not shield him from the truth that was settling over them like a shroud. The world had been neatly divided into predator and prey, and the rules of civilization had been suspended indefinitely. These horrors could not grow in a vacuum. They were enabled by a confluence of factors. The deep roots of European anti-Semitism provided the ideological soil. The crushing power of the German military and the SS provided the muscle. But there was also a quieter, more pervasive enabler, the indifference of the outside world. The ghetto walls were a physical barrier, but also a psychological one. For many in Warsaw, the suffering on the other side became an abstraction, a problem they could not or would not see. The vulnerability of the trapped population was absolute, their pleas for help lost in the cacophony of war and the chilling silence of complicity. The pattern emerged in the summer of 1942. It had a name, the Großaktion Warschau. The German authorities announced a resettlement to the east. The pattern was methodical, bureaucratic. Daily quotas were set. The Jewish Council, under impossible duress, was forced to help organize the roundups. The pattern was a lie, a carefully constructed fiction to prevent panic and ensure the smooth operation of the machinery. The destination was not resettlement. It was Treblinka. It was an extermination camp. The operation became systematic, a daily harvest of human lives, escalating with terrifying efficiency. The machinery of evil had a specific geography. Its heart was the Umschlagplatz, a railway siding at the edge of the ghetto. This was the collection point. Here, thousands were herded each day, packed into cattle cars with no food, no water, no sanitation. The language used was clinical, sanitized. They were not people, they were units being transported. The process was supported by a network of participants. German SS officers who oversaw the operation, Ukrainian and Latvian, auxiliaries who provided brutal enforcement, and the Jewish ghetto police, forced into the horrific role of rounding up their own people under threat of their own family's deportation. It was a system that implicated everyone it touched, a supply chain of death built on terror and lies. Inside the ghetto, the psychological landscape fractured. At first, the rumors of gas chambers were dismissed as impossible, too monstrous to be true. But as friends and neighbors vanished, as the empty apartments were sealed, a new reality took hold. It was a creeping, paralyzing dread. For Jakub and Lena Wolski, the fantasy of survival within the ghetto walls died. The choice became stark: wait for the cattle car or risk everything on the slim chance of escape. The mind, in such a state, begins to compartmentalize. The need to protect one's children overrides the paralyzing fear. The decision to flee was not an act of hope, but an act of pure primal desperation. There had been near discoveries before they made their final choice. A German patrol conducting a random search of their apartment building had passed their door without stopping. Jakub, caught outside after curfew, had hidden in a bombed-out ruin, his heart pounding as the soldiers' boots crunched on debris just feet away. A neighbor, whose own child was sick with typhus, had looked at Samuel's relatively healthy face with an expression that was not envy, but a cold, calculating resentment. These were the moments that haunted the historical record, the tragic what-ifs. Each close call was a spur, a confirmation that their time in the ghetto was running out. They had to disappear completely. The zenith of the horror arrived in the spring of 1943. The remaining inhabitants of the ghetto, knowing what awaited them, chose to fight. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was an act of final, desperate defiance. The German response was overwhelming and absolute. The SS moved in with flamethrowers and artillery, liquidating the ghetto block by block. It was during this inferno that the Wolskis made their move. Through a contact Jakub had made, a Polish woman named Janina, they were smuggled out through the sewers. As the ghetto burned, the Nazi machine was at its peak of destructive fury. It was this peak that drove the Wolskis into the earth, into a small damp cellar beneath Janina's apartment on the Aryan side of the city. They became invisible victims, ghosts living beneath the floorboards of the visible world. Their existence was reduced to a space no larger than a pantry. There was a mattress, a bucket for waste, and a small vent that provided stale air. By day, they were absolutely silent. The children learned not to cry, not to laugh, not to run. They learned to communicate in whispers and hand signals. Their lives were governed by the rhythms of the world above. The footsteps of Janina, the distant rumble of a streetcar, the sudden shouts that could mean anything. They were the human embodiment of the millions who had been erased. Their survival a secret, their names unrecorded, their fate resting on the courage of one woman. Society looked away, but Janina did not. Her act of defiance was quiet, domestic, and profoundly dangerous. Hiding Jews was punishable by death for the entire household. Her neighbors were a constant source of anxiety. Did the woman next door notice the extra food Janina bought? Did the man upstairs hear the muffled cough in the night? Warsaw was rife with schmalkavnicy, blackmailers who hunted for hidden Jews to turn them over to the Gestapo for a reward. Every knock on the door was a potential death sentence. The city around them was a web of fear, collaboration, and pockets of incredible bravery. Janina's choice demonstrated the uncomfortable truth. Many people knew something was wrong, but convenience, ideology, or mortal fear silenced them. External pressures began to signal the unraveling of the German machine. In 1944, the Wolskis, huddled in their cellar, could feel the faint vibrations of distant artillery from the east. The Red Army was coming. Janina would bring them whispered news of Allied landings in France. Then, in August, a new sound erupted around them. The roar of the Warsaw Uprising as the Polish Home Army rose up against the German occupiers. Their hiding place was now in the center of a new, ferocious battle. The city was being systematically destroyed above their heads. The German response was as brutal as it had been in the ghetto, but now the machine was not operating from a position of absolute strength. It was fighting for its own survival. The internal pressures on the hidden family and their rescuer were immense. 27 months in a dark, cramped space frayed nerves to the breaking point. Jakob and Lena argued in frantic, choked whispers over the smallest things. A spilled cup of water, a child's restless movement. Samuel and Hannah had forgotten the sun, their muscles atrophied. They had no toys, no books, only the stories their parents whispered in the dark. The psychological toll was a slow, grinding erosion of the self. For Janina, the strain was equally unbearable. The constant fear of discovery, the moral and physical burden of keeping 4 people alive, wore her down. The entire system of their survival was a delicate construction threatening to collapse under its own weight. The breakthrough came not with a single event, but with a gradual, terrifying cessation of noise. In January 1945, the sounds of battle receded. The German retreat was chaotic and final. For several days, there was an eerie quiet, a vacuum of authority. Then, one morning, Janina opened the cellar door, her face illuminated by the gray winter light. She was crying. "They are here," she whispered. "The Russians are here. It is over." That moment, the opening of a door, was the end of their entombment. It was the moment their silence could finally be broken. It was the breakthrough from a state of non-existence back into the world. The revelation was not one of joyous liberation, but of profound shock. When Jakob, Lena, and the children climbed the stairs and stepped outside, they did not recognize their world. Warsaw was gone. In its place was a sea of rubble, a skeleton of a city. The sky, which they had not seen in over 2 years, was a vast, oppressive gray. The children, pale and blinking, clung to their parents, terrified of the open space. The physical proof of the Nazi regime's collapse was all around them, in the burned-out husks of buildings and the utter silence of a city without people. their personal revelation, their survival, was met with the public revelation of total annihilation. The accounting began immediately, and it was a litany of loss. They walked through the ruins searching for their old apartment, for friends, for family. They found nothing and no one. Lena's entire family from Lodz gone. Jakob's cousins gone. The friends whose children had played with Samuel and Hannah, all gone. Their individual search for survivors was a microcosm of a continental effort to grasp the scale of the catastrophe. As the Allied forces liberated the camps, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, the full documentation of the horror was laid bare. The journals, the photographs, the meticulous records of the dead, and the testimony of the skeletal survivors confirmed the numbers. The Volskys had survived, but they had survived into a graveyard. The trial for the architects of this horror took place in Nuremberg, a distant stage for global justice. For the Volskys, the reckoning was more immediate and far more personal. The perpetrators they had known, the ghetto guards, the collaborators, the indifferent officials, had either fled, been killed in the fighting, or simply melted back into the civilian population, their crimes hidden behind new identities. There was no single person to hold accountable for their stolen years, for their murdered families. The verdict on their suffering was written in the emptiness of their lives. They had been sentenced to a lifetime of memory, a punishment from which there was no appeal. The survivors and their families faced a future haunted by the past. The Volskys eventually emigrated, seeking a new life far from the ghosts of Poland, but the trauma was a permanent passenger. The children, Hannah and Samuel, struggled to adapt. They were afraid of loud noises, of strangers, of open doors. They had never learned to play. For Jakob and Lena, survival was tinged with a profound and inescapable guilt. Why them? Why had they been spared when so many others just as worthy had perished? They were part of a generation of survivors who had to learn not only how to live again, but how to live with the dead. In the aftermath, the full story was not always told. In post-war Poland, under a new Soviet-dominated regime, the narrative of the war often focused on Polish national martyrdom, sometimes minimizing the unique, systematic nature of the Jewish genocide. The stories of Polish rescuers like Janina were not always celebrated. In some circles, they were even viewed with suspicion. The fight for official acknowledgement, for the truth of what had happened in the ghettos and the cellars, was a long and arduous battle. Justice was further complicated by the geopolitical realities of the Cold War, where expediency often overshadowed the moral imperative to prosecute every crime. Slowly, the cultural legacy began to form. The stories of the hidden children, of the righteous among the nations, entered the public consciousness. Institutions like Yad Vashem in Israel were created to document the Holocaust and to honor non-Jews like Janina, who risked their lives to save others. Her name was inscribed on a wall, her quiet act of courage transformed from a private secret into a public testament. The Volskys' personal horror became a part of a larger, essential cautionary tale. A story told in museums and memorials to ensure that the silence that had consumed a generation would never be allowed to descend again. What then is the concluding moral? What do we learn from the silence of a cellar in a city of ghosts? We learn that civilization is a fragile veneer, easily stripped away by ideology and hatred. We learn that the banality of evil is not a cliché. It is found in the paperwork of deportation quotas and the quiet indifference of a neighbor who closes their curtains. But we also learn of the human capacity for profound courage, for the moral clarity that compels a person like Janina to open her door when all the forces of society command her to keep it shut. The story of the Volsky family asks us a timeless question. It looks at us from the past and demands to know, in the face of injustice, are we the ones who build the walls, The ones who look away or the ones who leave a light on and unlock the door. To the cellar, remembering is our sacred duty, for the dead cannot speak, we must be their voice.